This is Ron Mahler once again, and we're looking at chapter 3 today. Chapter 3 has to do with parables and telling truth through story. If you're like me, you'd love a great story. We can find them anywhere. We can just listen to people. We can find them on the internet, in the newspapers, anywhere. And maybe you can recall when you were younger sitting on your grandfather's lap or something, and he would tell you stories. He would tell you stories about farming, or stories about the war, or about his father, or, maybe going to the candy store with his sisters or brothers, and just all sorts of different little stories. And I love stories, as I said, and stories are a very powerful way of communicating with people. And Jesus used stories to communicate and teach those around him. Teach them specifically about truth, spiritual truth. You may have heard a definition about parables that they are sort of heavenly stories that have an earthly meaning. But I like to say that they are earthly stories that have a kingdom agenda attached to them or built within them. And so Jesus would tell these stories as a teaching tool. And it's interesting that he told these stories not to sort of gain followers, but to actually weed them out. So there were the element in the crowd who were hooked by these stories, who were spiritually hungry and liked them and thought, okay, I'm going to keep following Jesus because I like what he's saying. And he's talking about the kingdom, and he's talking about truth, and I'm curious. I want to hear more. I want to know more. And then there was the other element of the audience who, just basically followed Jesus around. They liked his fine-sounding words. They liked the miracles. But there was no real interest in spiritual truth or change within their lives. And I think we, see that in the church today as well. Now, parables were concise stories that had a beginning, a plot, and an end. And they kind of, I guess we could put it this way, they were challenging in their intent, and they had spiritually shaping content. And they they got us to imagine possibilities as they led us to a destination. So as I said, parables had a beginning and an end. But how they ended was not necessarily how they had to end. Jesus ended his stories the way he did to teach truth, but they didn't have to end that way, kind of like the parable of the great banquet in Luke 14. The three people that were invited to the banquet didn't have to say no. They could have said yes. So that's what I'm kind of referring to there. But Jesus was a powerful storyteller. And in Matthew, we read that those who heard him said that he spoke like one that had authority, spoke like one that separated him from the rest. And so when it comes to parables, a parable is a story, a tool that Jesus used. And the people who wanted to know more after hearing these parables just kept following him. And of course, the Lord would take his followers off by himself, and he would often reveal the truth of these parables, because parables kind of were, in some sense, they were kind of cryptic. Now, Jesus could have made up these stories, or he could have been relaying a story about something that he actually witnessed. I think sometimes about the tax collector at the temple and the Pharisee. I wonder sometimes if that's an actual transaction that Jesus witnessed and he told this story. And so parables were powerful to communicate truth. And the parable of the great banquet is no different. When we break down the different characters and plots and direction and thrust of the parable, it's powerful. It's powerful because it's talking about so many different things. And of course, it has to do with those who enter into eternal life and those who had the opportunity to, but turned it down. So we're going to talk about that kind of thing in chapter 3, and I hope you enjoy it in the reading, in your group, or in your individual study. Thank you.